obviously not supply information, but direct him to various areas and assume facts that are in evidence for him. For the court's edification, he had hip surgery in late October of 18 and was not in the hospital and on sick leave from the last week of October all the way through November and into the first week of December. So there was a lot that went on that he wasn't even there for. That's my request.
Who's up for crossing the witness?
I'm crossing the witness, Your Honor.
Okay. Any position?
Yes, Your Honor. I think with respect to the state's calling the witness, I think he's open to any questions that are within his scope of knowledge.
Well, I don't think she's trying to curtail your ability to cross.
Oh, not at all, Your Honor. Not at all.
I anticipate you'll be asking about all kinds of things in the pharmacy system.
Okay. I thought she was trying to eliminate a cumulative effect. I wasn't sure.
No.
You said you want to lead?
Yes, to the
To
extent
get to the point, she wants a little bit of leeway to lead so that we don't get trickling into things.
Okay. All right. Well, I think if it gets to the point where
If
it's...
it becomes problematic,
Sure.
then we'll talk.
Yeah, yeah. And I want to obviously reserve the right to object if we get into, volumes of cumulative information. But I don't intend to step on cross at all.
Okay.
On another topic, may I comment?
Sure.
I heard the state mention that they're looking to, cut back on the potential cumulative issues that may arise in the case. And if they're interested in meeting over the lunch hour on how we could trim this case down a little bit, we're more than happy to meet with them and see what issues we can work on and perhaps what witnesses we might be willing to trim this case down so we can move it along as needed.
Always.
Okay.
We're always interested.
Well, I'll give you guys something to do during the lunch hour.
Yeah, thank you.
Anything else? Ms. Schaefer? Bram?
Did you have something else?
Yes, I just wanted to, I know that Dr. Moody is the second witness up, and I wanted to just make sure that we didn't have any more 702 issues as it relates to this specific witness. She did not work the night shift at ICU. She worked the day shift. We certainly don't mind her going into the patients that she worked on in this case, but to get into her palliative withdrawal and her extubations, for which Dr. Husel never witnessed or was present for, I think it's going to take us down that road again. And I just wanted to bring it to the court's attention.
Well, I imagine being a fact witness, that's what she is. I assume that's what she's going to be, a fact witness?
She is a fact witness that has expert knowledge, Judge. We're not asking her to opine on Dr. Husel's practices. We will solicit from her and from every other doctor that has done palliative extubations with the same patient population, in many cases the same patients, that's treated the same patients. We will ask what their practices are to give the jury, because that is what this is about. What is the standard of care? What do they do? I think that's entirely appropriate. We intend to ask every doctor that question, just as we have them. That was a fact witness. What is your practice? What are the drugs you give, and what are the doses you give? And I think it's entirely appropriate. It is the point of the case.
These are the backdoor experts. They're trying to enter this evidence in through their bootstraps. It's clear that that's why they've been given the ability to call 5 expert witnesses to testify to this. Unless they can show that these doctors trained Dr. Husel to do it this way, or instructed him to do it this way, or that he was present to do it this way. How they work with patient A has nothing to do with how Dr. Husel dealt with patient B. These aren't, we've heard multiple times by all of these, by everyone that's testified, everything is patient specific. To start generalizing it by asking them how they do things I think clearly goes outside the realm and is simply a backdoor way of attempting to get in expert testimony, as admitted by the prosecutor by saying that they have expert knowledge. If that's not a sign as to what their true intent is, I don't know what is.
Well, it goes back to our discussions earlier between subjective approach and objective. So we're just going to have to go through them, I guess, as we go. You know, because I feel that they get in the subjective side of it, but as long, the first time they opine, they better be qualified.
I think what happens is they ask them how they do it, and then they ask, have you had any problems doing it that way? Well, that's subjective to the family. If my loved one is being tortured because they're not getting enough pain meds, that's specifically my issue. And they may not necessarily convey that to the physician. They might convey it to the nurse. We have no way of knowing all of this. And this just opens the door to so many issues, so many potential issues that properly affect the constitutional issue of Dr. Husel's right to confront those witnesses who are testifying against him. So for that reason, I think we're really treading dangerous waters here in light of what the prosecutor's intent is.
Okay, well, I don't agree with you on the intent of the prosecutor. We've had this discussion before. Anytime you get into these quasi-experts, you've got to go through the analysis. I laid it out before, as I understand 702, 704. So we'll leave it at that. We're just going to have to deal with it as we go.
Understood, sir.
I don't see a choice, you know. Well,
Respectfully, I do, but okay.
okay, you're saying I should ban all the testimony of these doctors? Really?
I'm sorry?
I should just not permit these doctors to testify because of the potential problems?
No, they should be allowed to testify just about relevant evidence. It's irrelevant what Dr. Moody does with patient A as it relates to indicting patient B. And I don't see how her...
How's it, okay, you're asking the doctors on how they perform things. One of the examples will be this doctor dealt with them during the day shift, Dr. Husel dealt with them during the night shift. It's perfectly relevant on how they would have handled the situation.
I believe it's relevant to what they did specifically with this patient and why they did what they did as it relates to the indictment patients, but how they handle their extubations on other patients, I simply don't see.
I don't think that's what he's asking. He's asking, now, I think it would be fair for him to say, is this how you do it? And that's it. We've made our record, okay? Let's get the jury in here and rock.
Thank you, Your Honor.
We can have more discussions on the break.
Thank you, Your Honor.
You're-
There's something else?
Yes, please. And I'm sure you were already going to do it, but if you could advise the jury as to why we're not continuing with Dr. Eli.
That was my first thing out of the box.
Thank you, Judge.
And I'm going to fall on the sword for the whole thing. I'm not going to point at anybody. It'll be my decision, since it was my decision.
I appreciate that.
Gee, should we get here early enough? I told her to bring in the jury. He wants to go to the restroom.
This is part of the settlement. Is that what we're saying?
You can be seated. Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, good morning. How are you today? Okay. I made a decision yesterday afternoon. I'm going to bring back Dr. Eli live. Okay? It won't be today. So we're not going to continue on with his testimony. We're going to call a new witness. We have to adjust to his schedule to bring him back live. That way it's just consistent. You get to see him live the whole time. Okay? So you're not taking any inference from that. It's just, that was my decision. Okay? We ready to call our first witness, Ms. Grubb?
We are, Your Honor. We call John O'Connell.
Okay. Come on down, make the path. Okay, I need you to raise your right hand. You solemnly swear to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God. Go ahead and make yourself comfortable in the chair there. You've got an aerial mic there in front of you, so you have to enunciate. You're in an area we was sanitized last night. You can take off your mask if you wish, but that's strictly up to you. Okay? I need you to state your name for the record and spell it so that my court reporter can get used to your diction.
John O'Connell, John, O''Connell.
Okay, just relax for a second, okay? Just enunciate out. It'll pick you up as long as you talk up, okay? You're in kind of a fishbowl too, so that's why I'm having you do this, okay? With that, Ms. Grubb.
Thank you, Your Honor. Good morning,
Morning.
and good morning to the jury. John, I believe that your preferred form of address is the name Sean. Is that correct?
Yes, that's correct.
Okay. And why Sean?
My father used to call me Sean. He was the Irishman, and Sean is John in Gaelic. So my dad always called me Sean, and my mom always called me John. So
You were confused, were you? Okay. So, Sean, talk to me a little bit about about your education and how long you've been in Central Ohio, et cetera.
I graduated, I got a Bachelor of Science degree at Ohio State University in 1977. Then I got a master's degree in pharmacy administration in 1991. I started at Mount Carmel Hospital in 1975 as a pharmacy intern and worked there for 2 years until I graduated, and then I got hired as a staff pharmacist at Mount Carmel Hospital West. I stayed there at Mount Carmel West until 2019, and so I was there for approximately 43 years. I was a staff pharmacist for probably about 15 years, and then I got promoted to a operations manager at Mount Carmel West, and then I continued as an operations manager, and eventually in approximately 2012, I took on the job. I first was interim director of pharmacy, and then I was promoted to director of pharmacy. So I was director of pharmacy into 2019.
Okay, let's back up a little bit. Did you grow up here?
Pardon? Yes. Well, no, I grew up in Cleveland, Ohio, and then I came down here to go to Ohio State University and met my wife, and we never left.
Okay. Let's draw your attention to the time frame that this case is about, which is approximately 2014 to 2018. Who was in your chain of command at the hospital at that time?
In 2014, I reported, my chain of command below me was I had an operations manager, Randy Miles, and I had a clinical coordinator, Sarah Hemker, and reporting upward, I had a chief pharmacy officer, Janet Woody, who was the system pharmacy officer for all of Mount Carmel Health hospitals. And I also had kind of a dotted line to Gina Bush, who was the vice president of nursing. And so those are my two that I reported to.
Okay. Why did you stay at Mount Carmel for 43 years?
Well, I started, as I said, I started in 1975 as a pharmacy intern, and I worked there for a couple of years and as an intern, but then I became a pharmacist in 77. And as I continued to work at Mount Carmel, I began to understand that they had a wonderful culture. Mount Carmel West was founded by the Sisters of the Holy Cross, and they had a mission to take care of the indigent. And so Mount Carmel West was actually built in that area where there were a lot of indigent, poor people. So I began to realize that that culture really began to attract me as more than just practicing as a pharmacist, but that fulfilling a mission to do charity work and try to provide health care to those patients in the inner city. I also began to talk with a lot of colleagues, nurses, doctors, as I continued to stay on, and they all seemed to, or a great number of them, shared the same philosophy of taking care of patients in that area. And that's a lot the reason why many of them came there and why many of them stayed there. So I really felt drawn to the mission. And so despite the fact that I might have other opportunities to move on, I continue to stay on. So
Thank you. And does Mount Carmel Hospital express any religious identity?
well, it's a Catholic institution, so it does have a lot of foundation in that. Like I said, it was founded by the Sisters of the Holy Cross. So there were a number of individuals that I knew at Mount Carmel who were Catholic, but a lot of them were Christian. But we had some non-Christian individuals there too. But we would go to church together sometimes. There was a chapel, and a lot of our colleagues, doctors, nurses, myself, when we were working on days where
Your Honor, I'm sorry.
Mass or whatever.
At some point, it's not responsive at this point.
It's perfectly responsive to the question.
The question was, is it a
Okay.
Catholic hospital?
We're not doing overruled.
Okay.
Doctor, finish up what you got.
I think he's expressed
I think
enough.
so, yeah.
Was and is Mount Carmel a teaching hospital?
Yes, Mount Carmel's has medical residents, surgical residents. They also, we take pharmacy residents, and it also has a College of Nursing. So it's very committed to teaching, yeah.
Okay. And what does that mean for the layperson? How would you explain what complications or other factors are at play at the hospital if it is a teaching hospital?
I'd say the advantage of the teaching hospital is that you have students constantly coming in, and you have preceptors who work with those students. So you would, as a preceptor, you would get a lot of knowledge from the students while they were still in school to update you. But also you developed a really good rapport with the students. Say the medical and surgical residents, for example, our pharmacists would be involved with helping to teach some of those medical and surgical residents, and developed a good collegial relationship such that when the residents graduated with their medical degrees or their surgical degrees, a lot of them would stay, and so our pharmacists were able to interact with them very well because they knew each other. So we had a very good relationship. So that teaching really brings a lot of current knowledge, and it also develops a very good relationship with the students, and then after they graduate, when they practice.
Thank you. Do you believe that the staff at Mount Carmel had assumptions about each other?
Objection, Your Honor, as to what others assumed.
Okay, I'll withdraw the question.
Yeah.
What are your assumptions? What were your assumptions about your coworkers, if you had any?
Well, my coworkers, because I was involved with a lot of hiring them, I knew them very well, and my assumption was that they would practice with integrity, that they were very honest, and honesty was a really important part, trust in honesty, so we could talk to each other openly and could trust what we would, information we would exchange in our daily practice. So integrity, honesty, a commitment to keeping up with their practice was what I would say was.
Okay. Was there a time when the hospital was planning to move?
Yes.
And what did that involve?
Well, that was, it took a tremendous amount of planning by everybody, especially the department heads at Mount Carmel West, to meet with architects, to talk about processes, to figure out what type of I guess, healthcare delivery system we wanted to have in Grove City. So we spent many, many hours with that. So I would individually met with architects, worked on the design of the new pharmacy. I also was involved with the State Board of Pharmacy to determine how we could transport narcotics when we did move. We talked about the services of pharmacy so that they were ideally set so that our pharmacists could work on the floors with the patients and deliver the best pharmacy care. So it was a lot of time spent on that.
Thank you. When did this planning begin?
I would have to say I started getting involved with it probably in about maybe 2016, 2015 was when they began. There had been plans in the works probably before that, but then when it really began to roll out, I got more involved.
Were there other pharmacy leaders involved in this planning process?
Yes, I mean, the chief pharmacy officer, Janet Woody, was involved. My operations manager, Randy Miles, was involved in helping with the design. Even my clinical coordinator was involved. So, yeah, we had pretty good representation.
Okay. I'm going to ask you a very personal question. When did you turn 65?
Let's see, that would be 7, 8. Be 2014. 2014, I think.
Okay. And the natural conversation that people have at 65 is, do I stay, do I go, do I retire? What paradigm was in your mind at that time?
Well, when I was 65, I really continued to be both challenged and enjoying what I was doing. And I was healthy, and I didn't feel any need to leave or retire at that time. And also, as I began to see when they decided to move the hospital, I really felt, because I had been there for so long, I really wanted to see that occur correctly so that, at least from the pharmacy's viewpoint, we would have really good services. And so I knew from all my experience previously that I could contribute to making a good transition to the new hospital. So I decided I'd stay on for a few years just to try to see that through.
Okay, thank you. So let's turn our attention briefly to your duties as director of pharmacy. What were your primary concerns as pharmacy director?
Well, there were multiple areas. I was the responsible pharmacist registered with the Ohio Board of Pharmacy, so I had overall responsibility for the management and safe supply of drugs throughout the hospital. I also was in charge of the finances of the Department of Pharmacy, so I had to oversee that we stayed within a budget, and I met with the finance people pretty frequently about that. I oversaw the purchasing of our pharmaceuticals. I also oversaw the actual personnel. I had about 80-some people that reported to me. We split those individuals up amongst my operations manager, but still overall I was still responsible for all those individuals in terms of their performance, and I did performance evaluations and made sure that they were performing adequately. If there were issues, we had to address them. I worked with Human Resources quite a bit on the development of these individuals. I also had to help prepare for the Joint Commission, which is a surveying body that comes to the hospital about every 3 years.
Can I stop you right there? People talk about the Joint Commission, but I think there might be a longer title for what that is. Could you supply us with the longer title?
The Joint Commission of the Accreditation of Hospitals.
Thank you.
Yeah. And so they would come by about every 3 years, and they had different standards, and they would do a thorough survey of the hospital. I was more focused on the area of the Department of Pharmacy. So that area was called medication management, and there were lots and lots of rules and regulations, and they would survey that to see if we were compliant with that. So I was really pretty much in charge of making sure that happened too.
Thank you. As director of pharmacy, was drug diversion an issue for you?
Yes, that was the beginning. What I was saying was the safety of the drugs, both the purchasing and the distribution of drugs. And diversion was a very big part of my job, to stay tuned to any issues that we would suspect any kind of drug diversion, and especially as the narcotic issues, opiate issues began to crop up in the past decade. We really had to pay attention to our supply of drugs, especially narcotics. to try to prevent that from getting out into the, not only to get it out into the public from theft, but also from individuals that might be working at the hospital that may have an issue with addiction and are diverting the drugs.
Thank you. Were there personnel involved with the pharmacy program at Mount Carmel that targeted drug diversion?
Yes, we had a we call him a system analyst. He was a pharmacist, and we had there were computer programs that at first one was called Pandora, and another one then later was RX Auditor, and these computer programs interfaced with Pyxis machines and would tell us if it would record when a narcotic was being taken out of the Pyxis machines and who took the drug out, and then reports would then be generated, and we would know how much Nurse X took out of a particular drug. Say it was fentanyl. We would know how many vials of fentanyl were taken out over a particular shift for that particular nurse. And then we would run reports and analysis for all the nurses in that particular unit, so we could see if anybody was taking more medication out than was the average. So if there were 10 nurses working on the floor on a particular shift, what was the average amount of narcotic they would take out in that shift? And then we would see, well, wait a minute, Nurse X is taking out 4 times as much. And that would alert us. So myself and my systems analyst would sit down every month with these reports and look at them, and that would be red flags. So once we saw that, we began to talk to our nursing directors over those particular nursing units and begin to ask them questions about, have you noticed anything going on with this particular nurse? Was she acting impaired? Calls in sick a lot? Her colleagues say anything that might make you think that something else is going on? And we would continue to pursue that. If we saw that we thought there really was a problem, we would notify the State Board of Pharmacy, and then they would get involved in the investigation to see if there was really a diversion. Did I cover that enough? It's kind of...
Thank you. Calling your attention to the period leading up to October of 2018, did you have serious concerns about drug diversion in the nighttime ICU at Mount Carmel West?
No. And that we never saw any blip in our tool that we used, the computer system, to see that one particular nurse, another particular nurse was taking out more than what would be the average. And the thing we have to understand is in the intensive care unit, opiates are used a lot, fentanyl and morphine, Dilaudid, and so the average was always pretty high. So we really couldn't notice any difference. So nothing alerted us to let us know that somebody was taking out an abnormal amount from the Pyxis machine on the average when we looked at a monthly reading.
Thank you. Previously in your testimony, you talked about your role as a procurer of pharmaceutical products for the hospital. Can you talk to us a little bit about what your role involved in obtaining the drugs or other pharmaceuticals?
Well, I had a pharmacy purchaser who reported to me in the department, and his job was to order the drugs, keep the inventory up of all our medications. And I would meet with him frequently. We would talk about what we call velocity, or how much were we going through with particular drugs. We'd be concerned about if we were going to run short on certain medications, especially critical ones. So we would talk about that. If there were changes in medical practice where new drugs were coming in, I would talk to him about, we would have to order those. And then we would also interface with our corporate owner, which was Trinity Health. And Trinity would work with buyers, large manufacturing companies, pharmaceutical companies, and they would use those buyers to purchase the drugs, and then we would then order what they told us that we needed, what company we needed to use. So Trinity would every year would look at the different drug manufacturers. They look at both their costs and their quality. So they would sometimes they would go to the factories and inspect them. They made sure that the quality was a high quality, so that the Mount Carmel Health System, we would be guaranteed that we would get a good manufactured product, and it wouldn't be some generic, for lack of a term, slop house. So that we actually used good manufacturers to supply our products.
Let's turn our attention to the general appearance of, say, for example, a vial of narcotics. Would that vial from a manufacturer have information on the vial?
Yes, absolutely. It would have the lot number of where what lot the drug was made from the manufacturer. Of course, the name of the manufacturer, the expiration date of the drug, of course, the strength and volume of the drug, or we would call it concentration. That was pretty much the information on and it would also have a barcode. So when it was being used, that particular individual vial, it could be scanned, and then that scanning would also tell us it's the correct drug.
So even down to a little tiny 2 milliliter vial, you could keep track of that?
Yes, absolutely. You could track it.
And did you?
Yes. We had reports, and if we ever, for example, periodically, there'd be a notice that there might be a tainted batch from a manufacturer such that the drug wasn't as potent as it was supposed to be. And so they would alert us, and then we would know, they would give us the batch, and then we were able to go actually into our inventory, not only in our storage area, but also in our Pyxis cabinets, and actually pull those drugs out and replace it with another product that was meeting the standards. And then we would get that drug back to them.
Okay, thank you. Did this procedure involve staying on top of drugs for freshness and rotating stock if needed?
Yeah, our computer system, our Pyxis system, would alert us on any drugs that were approaching expiration. So it would give us a lead time of a few days. It would say X drug is going to expire. So our pharmacy technicians would get reports of that, and they would actually daily go through the inventory, and they would pull the expired or almost expired drugs.
Thank you. Let's turn our attention now to the fall of 2018. Was there a major event in your life in the fall of 2018?
Yes, I had physically I had my hip replaced. The entire month. I was gone the entire month of November on medical leave. I had my hip replaced October 29th. And so I was gone through the month of November and returned December 3rd. And so I was in a medical leave of absence.
What was your last day of work at Mount Carmel West?
Friday, October 26th.
Did anything happen on that day with respect to dosage issues and a physician?
Actually, on October 25th, which I believe was a Thursday, was when my operations manager, Randy Miles, approached me in the morning and told me that one of our night pharmacists had a concern about a dosage of medication, and I can't remember if he told me it was midazolam or fentanyl, or maybe both. And Randy said he was concerned about that, and so he was...
Stop. Got it. Sustain, let's rephrase.
Thank you. You can't say what Randy told you, but
Oh, okay, sorry.
you did have a conversation with him.
Yes, I had a
Correct.
conversation.
Okay. And did you direct him or any other person that reported to you to engage in any activities as a result of that conversation?
Yes, I directed him to contact our quality and risk management individual, Katie Barga, and alert her that we had a concern and that we needed to look further into it to find out the circumstances of it, so that we would know if it was a serious problem or just a general report, because in my capacity, I often heard people would come and tell me they have a concern about a particular drug or whatever, or the use of the drug. And so normally the first thing we have to do is get more information on it and understand why the doctor prescribed it and what was the patient's circumstances before we move into a larger investigation. So I went up to Katie, who was then going to talk to the nurses and look into it further.
Thank you. What day did you come back again?
December 3rd.
Okay. And upon your return, were there any developments with respect to this dosing question?
When I came back December 3rd, I was bombarded by a lot of information related to the usage of fentanyl. At that time, individuals in Mount Carmel and risk management, quality assurance, were involved with running reports to find out more about high doses of fentanyl that were being used. They did some extensive, they ran extensive reports and determined that there were high usage of fentanyl, especially in one particular physician, which was Dr. Husel.
Objection, Your Honor.
Just asking him what he learned.
Okay, overruled.
Thank you. Go ahead.
So I was just learning that and found out the potential number of individuals and patients that were involved.
Okay, let's hold on for a second. Next question.
Okay, thank you. What was your reaction upon gaining knowledge about the dosing?
Well, my reaction was surprise that there were so many patients that were involved, and also surprise it was one individual physician. So, you know, my reaction was really very concerned about what happened. And
Next question.
Thank you. Okay. So did you take steps to address some of the interactions that you learned about with your staff? In other words, did you learn that a certain email had been sent by Josh Mush in June of 2018?
Yes, what happened with that was when I'd gotten back that first week of December, I addressed my pharmacy staff at a meeting and, asked them, I told them that I was surprised that no one had.
Roger, I think the question is not being responded to. The question was about the email from Josh.
Okay. I'll leave the answer as it stands. Let's ask a new question.
Okay, thank you. Did Josh Mush have any elevated role or assignments in the hospital that may have caused him to elevate a concern?
Josh was, at that time, we had formed an internal quality and safety committee in our Department of Pharmacy. And Josh, who was a staff pharmacist, had volunteered to be on this committee, along with a few other pharmacists and pharmacy technicians. Josh had volunteered and also volunteered to be the chair of that committee. So that was his role, and so the email that Josh had put out that I became aware of, that email was brought to my attention by another pharmacist who said you should see this.
Your Honor, as to
Can't
what
talk
the
about-
pharmacist said.
Gotcha.
Okay.
You can't talk about what someone has told you, okay?
Okay.
Did you confront Josh about what he did or didn't do after he expressed his concerns?
Yes. That first week I called, asked Josh to come to my office after I had read that email, and I asked him, this email was sent out in June, and I never heard anything else about it. Did anybody address you or talk to you? Because the email was asking the staff for information about high doses of fentanyl and ketamine.
Okay, stop.
Thank you. Okay.
You can finish it up, just that he was giving you more of a narrative than he was responsive. So,
Yeah, I'm done with the line anyway.
okay.
Sorry.
Okay, so did you also come to find out that there had been a discussion in a huddle in 2017 about some dosing practices of a physician?
I myself was not a participant in that huddle. I don't recall that.
Okay, what is a huddle?
A huddle is an informal meeting prior to shift change of our staff. So when people came in at 7 o'clock in the morning, pharmacists and pharmacy technicians, and the previous shift was still there, say the night shift, we would get together and they would discuss any kind of issues, just short-term issues in transition from one shift to the other. So they would bring up a point like, oh, by the way, we think we're running short on this particular drug, or there's been a computer that's down in something else. They brought up just sort of immediate concerns, so that would help transition to the next shift. So we would do that at 7 o'clock in the morning, And then we also did a huddle again at 3 o'clock in the afternoon when the day to evening shift occurred.
Would there be a scribe or somebody taking notes at a huddle?
The huddle was led typically by my operations manager or clinical coordinator. I occasionally was there, but not too frequently. And any notes that were taken were just strictly notes that were brought up on the particular concern. Nothing was formal. We weren't writing down like a meeting of everything that was going on in that huddle. Whoever was running the meeting might take a note that we need to follow up on this.
Okay. So let's talk for a minute about the training of pharmacists. How long again were you a pharmacist?
45 years.
Okay. And do pharmacists diagnose disease?
Could you repeat that?
Do pharmacists diagnose disease?
No, they don't diagnose.
In a hospital setting, do pharmacists order drugs?
No.
Okay. During your course of employment at Mount Carmel, did you mentor young pharmacists?
Yes, we had a pharmacy residency program. So we had pharmacists who had just graduated with their degree in pharmacy, and then they spent another year of training, more like on-the-job training. And they would rotate in multiple areas with multiple pharmacists on our staff, and they would actually spend a month with me going over finances and what a director does and a lot of other things like that. So I interacted with them. I was also a preceptor for Ohio Northern University and Ohio State University. So we took students in their last year of pharmacy school, and I would spend time talking to them and mentoring them and teaching them about pharmacy.
Thank you. What to your knowledge was taught in pharmacy school about end-of-life care?
That to me was an area that was, I would say I did not recall in my training anything on end-of-life care. Of course, that was a long time ago, but as the years went on, and I would interact with the pharmacy residents, students, there was never really a discussion of end-of-life care. There was no, to my knowledge, training on end-of-life care. There did begin to evolve knowledge on palliative care that became a specialty, and that kind of fell into somewhat oncology. So we did have a couple of pharmacists who spent some time on their own learning about that, so they increased their knowledge base in areas of palliative care. But end-of-life formalized training, it didn't, as far as I know, up until when I left, there wasn't any that I knew about locally or nationally.
Thank you. Did Mount, just to address Mount Carmel, did Mount Carmel have a training module on palliative care or end-of-life care for pharmacists?
Not at the time up through December of 2018.
Thank you. Who would the pharmacist rely upon to lead them as far as proper medication?
Any type of medication or just
In palliative care.
Oh, in palliative care. The pharmacist leaned heavily on the physician. the physician was especially the palliative care physicians who were trained in that area. Because the pharmacists didn't have the formalized training, they had to rely a great deal on the physician that they work with directly.
Okay. And in the palliative care arena, would the pharmacist always know what a medication order was going to be used for?
If there was a palliative care set of orders that was ordered by the physician, standard set of orders, then the pharmacist would know that set of orders were put into the computer system, and so therefore they would know what those drugs are being used for, which would be palliative care.
Thank you. I'm going to place on the projector an order set. It's labeled States Exhibit 17B.
Sorry, ladies and gentlemen, it's my fault.
Sean, what is the topic or title of this?
Terminal ventilator withdrawal.
Okay. That's the rest of the first page. I'm going to show you the second page. Top and bottom. And the third page. Okay. Does this look familiar?
Yes.
And what's the effective date of this one?
Be 8/17/2016.
Okay. I'm going to also place States Exhibit 17A on the projector. Does that appear to be the same type of document?
Yes, terminal ventilator withdrawal.
And what's the effective and end date of that?
Effective date was 12/7/2010, and then end date was 8/17/2016.
Thank you. Let's talk about the drugs on here. This first page discusses morphine, correct?
Correct.
And it discusses the IV push protocols. Second page, Dilaudid, morphine, Versed, which is midazolam, correct?
Correct.
Last page, atropine, Ativan, Versed, oxygen.
Correct.
If a physician was going to employ this order set in a palliative extubation, would that physician place an order that would appear in pharmacy?
Your Honor, objection as to what a physician would do or wouldn't do. He's not a physician.
Well, I'm going to get there.
Okay.
We all know that the orders start and go.
I'll permit the question.
Thank you. If a physician was going to use this order set, would the employment of that order set arrive somewhere in pharmacy?
Yes.
How would that arrive?
It would be in the electronic, probably it would show up in PharmNet, which is the area where the pharmacists see their orders electronically. So
Okay.
they would see that in the multiple drugs that were selected.
All right. And when this request would come across FarmNet, would there be any notes on it as far as what it was for?
Other than the fact that it was for palliative extubation, or I should say terminal extubation, I don't think there'd be any other notes.
So if you're employing the order set, the use would appear in the queue?
These appear in the queue. To tell you the truth, I'm not sure.
Okay, all right, thank you. I note that morphine is prominently displayed on this order set, correct?
Correct,
Fentanyl is not, correct?
correct.
Why would morphine, if you know as a pharmacist, why would morphine be included on this order set and fentanyl would not?
Your Honor, objection.
Sustained.
Does your training and experience as a pharmacist tell you what the various properties of morphine are?
Yes.
What are they?
Well, it's obviously an opiate analgesic, so it's used for pain. It also has a property to help with, in lower doses, to help with oxygenation. So it's kind of like the drug of choice for pain, and especially with patients that have cardiac issues. Typically, they'll use morphine because it can increase oxygenation at a lower dose. At higher doses, then the respiratory depression comes in and it would overwhelm that. So that's generally why morphine is preferred.
Thank you. Okay. So there came a time when you were involved in the investigation of dosing in the nighttime ICU within the hospital. Is that correct?
Correct.
Okay. And did you participate in a HR interview at the hospital?
Yes, I did.
And do you know the date of that?
I'm sorry, I can't recall the date. It had to have been the first couple of weeks of December.
Did you opine at that time about diversion?
Repeat that question?
Did you opine during that HR interview as far as whether or not there could be diversion as part of this scenario, this dosing scenario?
I may have mentioned a little bit of concern, but my concern was not as great as what the dosing was going on.
Okay. Do you at this time believe that there was diversion going on in the nighttime ICU in the fall of 2018?
No.
Okay. You have retired and separated from the hospital at this time, is that correct?
That's correct.
Okay. What were the proceeding, or how did that proceed as far as a timeline from this HR interview forward?
Well, in January 27th of 2019, I was put on administrative leave.
Stop right there. Do you know why?
What was told to me,
Objection as to what was told to him.
Sustained.
Did you receive a written document?
No, I was just verbally told I was
Okay.
placed.
And as a result of being told that, you didn't go to work anymore? Is that right?
Correct.
Okay. And then, how long were you on this administrative leave?
Approximately 6 months.
Okay. And what happened at the end of that 6 months?
On July 11th, I was terminated.
Okay. And how were you terminated?
I got a phone call from my chief operating officer and the director of human resources for Mount Carmel West. They called me and told me.
So you did not receive a formal written termination?
No.
Okay. Do you have a separation agreement?
Yes, I do.
Okay. If you know, how many other people on pharmacy staff were either terminated or not reviewed or let go?
I believe the number was 13.
And as a result of this, did you have to hire counsel? Or did you hire counsel?
Yes, I did.
Okay. Did you also appear in at the state pharmacy board?
Yes, I did.
And did you give testimony there?
Yes. Yes.
All right. Did you discuss systemic failures at Mount Carmel West at the pharmacy board?
Systemic failure.
Failures in the pharmacy.
Yes.
And what did you tell them about the failures?
Well, they were asking me questions that were relevant to, or at least trying to find out what the failures might be. I personally didn't feel that there were failures in the pharmacy. I thought we had a pretty solid system. So they just were asking me more about the process of what was going on. And in terms of actual failure, I don't think that we came to a conclusion at the end of that there was any real failure of the pharmacy.
Okay. Was there discussion about the handling of retrospective review?
Yes, there was a discussion about that. And we talked about whether or not pharmacists were responsible for retrospective review on the orders that were pertinent in these cases, which of course was fentanyl, midazolam, which were procured by Pixis override. And so consequently, there was a discussion as to did our pharmacists review these orders retrospectively, because when you use override, it's not a prospective review of the order. The pharmacist doesn't get a chance to look at the drug order prior to it being administered. So then in the pharmacist's queue, after the process has already been done, it will show up in the pharmacist's queue later. So the pharmacist will complete the order just to clear it out of his queue, but they never really prospectively reviewed it. And we discussed that at the Board of Pharmacy meeting.
Okay. Had you received any direction from Trinity Health as far as that process?
Yes. When our computer system, our new, at the time, new computer system, which was Cerner, was put into place at Mount Carmel, there was, we began to realize that there was, in the FarmNet part of the computer system that the pharmacists work with, there was a box that appeared that had to be checked in order to clear orders out of the pharmacy queue. And there was a discussion about when the pharmacists checked that, did that mean that they verified the order retrospectively? And there was quite a discussion about that. Our staff pharmacists were concerned about that because they did not want to be held responsible for verifying an order that they never really saw that was already administered. So we talked to Trinity Health. It actually wasn't me, but it was the previous director of pharmacy, and spoke to an officer in Trinity Health about this, and our pharmacists being held responsible for that. And the answer was no, they're not going to be held responsible. And then also, we had a communication with the State Board of Pharmacy who said pharmacists are not responsible for retrospective verification of orders. So those are the two pieces. So I was able to say to the staff they're not responsible.
Thank you. A moment, Your Honor. Can you tell us when those discussions took place with Trinity? Or with the farm board, too?
The discussions with Trinity occurred before I became director. My guess, it was maybe 2011. I don't have it exact, 2010 or 2011.
Thank you. What about the farm board?
The State Board of Pharmacy, it had to have been, I don't know, maybe 2013, something like that. It was
This was after you became pharmacy director?
I'm not sure. I can't answer that. It might have been when I first began, but it did occur. I just can't remember. I believe it was maybe 2013 or something like that, 2014.
Okay. And actually, I'm finished with direct.
Ms. Massey, we're getting close to break. Do you want to go 10 minutes, or we can break and you can just start out fresh?
Fresh, if you don't mind, but
Okay.
Jerry?
Is that okay, guys? You guys use a break?
Sure.
Okay, let's take 15 minutes. Let's actually take like 20 minutes. And 25 too, okay?
All rise.
Remember the admonitions, so we'll see you in 20 minutes.
Yes,
Okay. And fair to say these are what they call order sets? Is that
Yes.
correct? You have to say yes or no just for the court report.
yes,
And you were deposed in relation to this case, were you not?
yes, I was.
And did you have an opportunity to review that deposition transcript prior to today?
Yes,
And do you remember during your deposition when you were asked specifically about order sets? Do you remember that line of questioning?
yes,
And in particular, you were asked who uses order sets. Is that fair to say?
I don't recall them asking me that, but
Okay, but more importantly, let me ask you just directly. Order sets are for nurses, correct?
they're, well, they have drug orders on them to check, so it's for the use of the physicians to order.
Okay, let me go to your deposition, if I could. Could you find that page? I may have lost it. 1 second, and I will find it. Sorry. Let me ask you this while I look for the section of your deposition about order sets. You would agree with me that order sets are not mandatory?
That's correct.
And if something's not a mandatory,
Object, Your Honor. If you approach.
Mayor, ladies and gentlemen, you haven't got to know each other today. Let's make our time well spent. Miss Schaefer, did you learn to juggle yet?
It's only a These are kid jokes. I'm running good. I used to write on my daughter's napkin for her lunch bag. And I never got them.
Take her a second. You still got like 10 seconds to entertain them. Oh, yeah? The one your daughter told you, or?
It was Jackie that told me.
Oh, Jackie told you? Okay. Okay.
let me follow up and be more specific. During the years of 2016, 17, 18, so my questions are going to be during the relevant time frame of this case. Fair to say that the order sets were not mandatory during that time frame.
That's correct.
I want to show you what has been marked as Defendant's Exhibit MCD3 and also MCD4. While I'm going to go one at a time, and I have shown them to the state of Ohio. Mr. O'Connell, do you recognize these? Specifically MCD3. Do you recognize this?
Yes.
Okay. I want to ask you a bunch of questions about it if we can.
Hold on. When you look and stare at the cross there, we're going to lose you on the mic. Remember, you're going to have to enunciate because you're focused elsewhere, and it's human nature to let the voice go down, so you have to let it schedule volume. I'm sorry for the interruption, Ms. Menashe. You may continue.
That's okay. Thank you, Your Honor. You would agree with me that 2018, 17, 16, there were 3 Pyxis machines on the ICU floor at Mount Carmel West. Is that correct?
I believe so, yes.
Okay. Let's just go through the data that appears on the sheet if we can. The time period seems to indicate, does it not, the year of 2017?
That's correct.
And it says, oh, all profile overrides. Do you see that?
Yes.
And you remember, and certainly you know in your capacity, that per policy during this time frame, an override was appropriate either in an emergency situation and/or if a procedure was being done. Is that correct?
That's correct.
And you remember being asked, and I assume testimony is here today, that a procedure, in your opinion, based on your experience and position at Mount Carmel West, did in fact include a palliative extubation.
Object.
Okay.
I don't believe,
Let's rephrase the question.
Do you remember being asked this line of questioning during your deposition about what you considered a procedure per hospital policy?
I remember discussing it, yeah.
Okay. Fair to say that you indicated that an intubation was a procedure?
That's correct.
And then you said, did you not, a palliative extubation would also fall in the realm of a procedure?
object, Your Honor. I don't believe this witness is competent as a pharmacist to decide what a medical procedure is. That would be a question for a physician.
Okay.
Your Honor, overrides is clearly within the purview of the pharmacy. When an override can and can't be used, this falls directly in line with that.
I'll permit the
That's,
answer.
that,
Sorry, back to the question. Do you recall saying, quote, a palliative extubation would also fall in the realm of a procedure?
I thought that was true. That was my opinion.
So going back to, and you've been a pharmacist for 45 years.
Yes, ma'am.
Going back to this sheet here, we know that this sheet is from 2017. Does it appear to you on sheet 1 to have indicate station 1? Do you see that?
Yes.
Okay. And I'm going to flip through the pages and then we're going to look at them as a group. Does it appear on the second page to say station 2?
Yes.
Does it appear on the third page to say station 3?
Yes.
Okay. Now I want to go back through and I'm going to write down the numbers on this piece of paper so we can talk about them as a group. With respect to station 1 in 2017, what was the total number of overrides from station 1 in the year 2017?
Is that the totality of the document on the thing? Because you're asking him for a mathematical
No,
calculation.
just the number that's indicated here, Your Honor.
Okay.
We're going to go through the math at the end. 16,510, is that correct?
That's correct.
Okay. And that's for station 1 in 2017. Going to page,
Did he answer?
he shook his head.
Yes.
You got to help us out. You got to give an oral response.
Thank you. Station 2, in the same year, it appears that the total station activity with respect to overrides was 11,600. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Station 3, with respect to overrides within 2017, appears to be 8,258. Would you agree with me?
Yes.
Now, I do not expect you to be able to know that math at the top of your head, but let's say that those three numbers from Station 1, Station 2, and Station 3, in 2017, the ICU totaled 36,368 overrides in 1 year. Okay, let's say that's the total number. Would you agree with me that if we divided that number by the number of days in a year, we've got about 100 overrides a day in the ICU in 2017?
Correct. The math's correct.
And just so I'm clear, these numbers, this data poll includes all shifts at Mount Carmel. It's for the entire year, correct?
That's correct.
Showing you what has been marked as Defense Exhibit MCD4. Just to reorient ourselves, this appeared, does it not, to be the override sheet for the year 2018?
That's correct.
And Station 1, the total number of overrides from Station 1 on the ICU floor appears to be 17,562 overrides. Is that correct?
That's correct.
And I just want to be sure so the jury knows, I'll compare the last sheet to show that the station numbers are in fact the same. Do you see this right here? COM1CW1 and COM1CW1.
Yes.
So we have 17,562 overrides from that one machine in 2018. Let's talk about the second machine, the ICU. This one I have to lift up a little bit. Second machine, 2018. It appears that there's 10,782 overrides for that machine in 2018, correct?
Correct.
Then going to Station 3, so the third and final station on ICU floor as of 2018, it appears that there was 8,521 overrides from that machine. Would you agree with me?
That's correct.
Okay. And if the math, those three total numbers, were to equal 36,868, we have about the same average of overrides every day on the ICU floor at Mount Carmel West, do we not?
Correct.
About 100 plus a day.
That's correct.
And the total number within 2 years of overrides on the ICU floor is over 70,000, correct?
That's correct.
Do you happen to know that Dr. Husel only works 3 days a week in the ICU?
Yes.
Yes, you do know that?
I thought, well, I knew he worked I didn't know 3 days.
Okay, you knew he worked part-time?
I know that he wasn't working full-time.
Ms. Menashe, be sure to mark that since you showed the jury,
I will, Your Honor.
okay? Referring to your mathematics.
Sure. It's my iPhone. Blame the iPhone if I'm wrong.
Well, we can admit your iPhone if you want. That means she doesn't get it back.
I wouldn't do that.
Jury.
I would never mark that, Your Honor. Just some follow-up questions about your direct examination. With respect to the conversation that you had with Randy Miles that you testified to that took place in your office. I know you were asked about that in your deposition and also in your HR interview. Fair to say that at the time when you were asked was involved with that order. Do you remember that?
Yeah, that's correct.
And you also indicated that when rating your concern about the information that Randy had given to you, that you said that your concern was about a media. Do you remember that?
Yes.
The morning huddles that you were, forgive me, they weren't morning, they happen twice a day as a matter of policy within the pharmacy department, is that correct?
That's correct.
7 a.m. and then 3 p.m.?
Correct.
And those huddles, those times are representative, are they not, of a shift change?
That's correct.
And sometimes you attended those huddles,
Sometimes, not real frequently, but I did.
and sometimes Randy would go to them,
Yes, and Sarah.
and Sarah. And I would assume that your testimony about the culture of Mount Carmel and the collegiality applies to the huddles as well. Is that true?
Correct.
Based on your direct testimony and how you describe the culture at Mount Carmel, fair to say people felt free to talk to one another if there were issues.
Yes, I believe so.
And it's one of the things that you liked about it,
Correct.
right? And so this wasn't a culture based on your long experience there, where people were operating in silos and not communicating with one another, correct?
As to form, if the question relates to the pharmacy department,
Okay.
he's competent. Elsewhere,
Ms. Menashe, let's restructure it, please.
Sure, but he did talk about the culture. But sure, I'm happy to do it. So the pharmacist and your experience with Mount Carmel, well, in your capacity, you certainly had dealings at Mount Carmel with people outside of pharmacy, did you not?
Correct.
And your statements during your direct examination with respect to how you felt about Mount Carmel's culture applied to Mount Carmel as a whole. Did those statements not?
Well, at Mount Carmel West, that was my experience, yes.
You found the culture there to be congenial, right?
Yes,
And people work together,
correct.
people helping out other people. You talked about the mission. Do you remember that testimony?
Yes.
And again, how many years did you work at Mount Carmel West?
1940, 45, 44.
And in your observation over all those years, in the huddles, people talk to one another? People being the pharmacists talk to one another?
Yes,
And as a matter of practice, right? If there's something on my shift that I found important or concerning or relevant in any way, I would pass it on to the next pharmacy shift so that they could have that knowledge, correct?
that's correct.
In fact, I remember from your direct, I wrote down part of the purpose of the huddles is for people to report any, quote, immediate concerns. Do you remember that testimony?
Yes,
Just curious, you mentioned this individual named Josh. So that Sam has it. How do you spell Josh's last name?
that's tough. His last name is Mush. I guess it's Mausch. I'm guessing on that. I can't.
Okay. And it was asked about him being on an internal quality and safety committee.
Correct.
If you know, when was that for?
I'd say probably maybe 2017.
And so,
Wasn't real,
sorry.
we hadn't been doing it that long, so,
But you were doing it prior to and at the time of Randy Miles coming to have the conversation with
Yes.
us, right?
correct.
So that year 18 and maybe even into 2017, there was an internal quality of safety committee at Mount Carmel West.
Correct.
Do you know how many people were on that committee?
It varied, but I'd say 6, 7 maybe.
You've never met Dr. Husel, is that correct?
Not to my recollection, no.
You were asked questions on direct about diversion. There had been some time ago meaning before 2016, 2017, 18, 19, there had been issues with diversion at Mount Carmel West, correct?
Correct.
And anytime there's an issue of diversion, it's the hospital's responsibility to report that to the pharmacy board. Is that right?
Correct.
I'm sorry.
Correct, yes.
Okay. You gotta help me out a bit. We do question and answer, okay? You're dying to get the answer out. Let her finish her question, because this young lady's trying to get it all down.
Okay. Sorry.
Okay, so let her finish her question. Ms. Menashe.
Appreciate the young lady, though. I hope Sam took that down.
You are much younger than me, so I guess I'm okay in due bounds. It wasn't meant for any other purpose.
Mr. O'Connell, with respect to diversion, there had been issues with diversion at Mount Carmel West, correct?
That's correct.
And I know even in your deposition, you were asked specifically that there was previously an issue with fentanyl diversion. Do you remember that, saying that, in fact, there had been an instance of that?
Correct.
But when you were asked on direct about any nighttime concerns within the ICU about diversion, during the year 2017, no concerns, correct?
That's correct.
2018, no concerns, correct?
That's correct.
2016, no concerns, correct?
Correct.
One moment, Your Honor. Few additional questions. I know you were asked about Mount Carmel West was closing and there was a Mount Carmel Grove City location opening. Do you remember that line of questioning?
Yes.
And at the time, your position was what, again?
Director of Pharmacy.
And you would agree with me that the Mount Carmel Grove City location couldn't have opened if there hadn't been a pharmacy, a licensing approved for that new building, correct?
That's correct.
And so certainly getting the licensing for the new building was, in your capacity, something that was very important.
Yes.
And you mentioned your severance agreement with the hospital.
Correct.
Fair to say that in your severance agreement, there is language that says
I
you...
object, that has not been shown to me.
Let me ask the question.
Gosh, I don't know, separation, I think. I thought of it as a separation agreement.
You thought of it as separation. So I just want to make sure. Obviously, I'm assuming that you signed that document that was given to you.
Yes.
And before signing it, you reviewed it.
Yes, I did.
And is your attorney in the courtroom here today?
Yes, he is.
I just want to make sure with respect to separation agreement, as you viewed it, that there is a paragraph in that agreement that says that you agree to not voluntarily aid or assist any person, entity, or group involved in any proceeding, inquiry, or investigation of any kind against any of the released parties, except to the extent as required by law, subpoena, or other compulsory process. Do you remember that language?
Yes.
So tell me if I'm right, that that means that if I, on behalf of Dr. Husel, had reached out to you to speak with you about this case, per your separation agreement, you could not have spoken to me.
Unless it was under subpoena, that's correct.
So the only way that I could have ever spoken to you, or that you would be here today, is being subpoenaed in.
Correct.
Have you ever at any point in time met with the prosecutors in this case?
Yes.
And where did that meeting take place?
In my attorney's office?
So they came to your attorney's office?
Yes.
And were you subpoenaed that day at your own attorney's office to have that meeting, if you know?
I'm not sure it was a subpoena. I don't think I was subpoenaed to do it.
So you were able to just have a meeting with the prosecutors?
Object, Your Honor. We'd like to approach.
Yeah, I figured. Get to know each other, guys. I figure you're getting close to knowing each other. I don't know.
I don't
Ms. Blair, her magical earphones. Okay, ladies and gentlemen, the objection is sustained. You disregard the last question. Next question.
Yes. So to dovetail on prosecutors, I'll just ask you generally, in advance of today, you received, did you not, through your attorney, a letter that addresses whether you are or are not considered a suspect in this case? Do you remember receiving that letter through your attorney?
I don't recall that.
Okay.
I don't recall a letter from,
You don't. Do you remember receiving a letter at all with respect to that?
I was verbally told that.
Okay. Would it help to refresh your recollection if I were to show you a letter that was provided? One moment while I get a sticker.
Preliminary question and possible objection, since this is addressed to Mr. Reinhardt.
It has his name.
It's addressed to him, Mr. Reinhardt. He's already said he doesn't remember.
Okay, well, we'll get there in a second.
Showing the witness what has been marked as Defense Exhibit RPH-S01. So you can take a look at that. Let me know when you're done.
Okay, thank you.
Now that you've had a chance to take, now that you've had a chance to take a look at that letter, does that refresh your recollection in any way?
I recall Mr. Reinhardt telling me that, but I don't recall seeing that document.
Okay. So, but you do recall being told that you weren't a suspect. Just a follow-up question as to that. Fair to say that it's your understanding, as you sit here today, that you will be treated only as a witness and not as a suspect so long as the state has indicated you tell the truth. Is that correct?
Correct.
And Mr. O'Connell, tell the jury, who do you think will be assessing your truth with respect to whether or not you're a suspect?
Objection.
Sustain, strike the question.
Do you believe that as you sit here today, you're a suspect?
No,
Do you believe that you were unfairly treated by Mount Carmel West?
yes.
Thank you. Nothing further.
Redirect?
Thank you, Your Honor.
In case you want these.
Thank you. I'll read 'em. Hi, Sean. Okay, I'm going to present State's Exhibit 20D.
Can I see that real quick?
Is this a new document?
Okay, look if it's on this.
Please review. I'm placing State's Exhibit 20D on the projector. It purports to be an email from Josh Mush, spelled M-U-S-C-H, to a number of people. And it's been previously identified as a business record of Mount Carmel Hospital. Sir, did you review this document?
Yes, I did.
Okay, have you seen this document before?
Yes.
What is this document?
Your Honor. One moment, I might be able to clear this up. Just one moment. His name's not on that email.
Yeah, I know, but it's a business record. It's been previously identified, and he's seen it before. He just testified. Okay.
Is there an objection then?
I was just trying to resolve something without a sidebar, given you don't allow root cross. Go ahead.
Well, that'll be an issue that we'll have to have a discussion on, won't we?
Okay, thank you.
I'm just trying to establish, this is the email that we discussed in direct, is that correct?
That's
And
correct.
was discussed in cross, okay. Ms. Menashe brought up the override procedure for Mount Carmel West, or from that Mount Carmel system, during her cross-examination. I'm going to present to the witness State's Exhibit 23C, which has previously been identified as the Automated Dispensing System Medication Override Policy, dated 2 of 2015. Does that purport to be what I identified it as?
Yes.
Okay. I'm projecting it. There's a special comments section, correct?
Correct.
In the middle?
Correct.
And it talks about allowable exceptions to the override policy, correct?
Correct.
What is the first allowable exception?
That an LIP controls the ordering, dispensing, and administration of the drug, such as, but not limited to, the operating room, endoscopy suite, emergency room, and cath lab suite.
Okay. And then there are emergency situations also, correct?
Correct.
So who holds responsibility for dispensing, using, or administering the drug in the first instance?
It would be the LIP.
Who is the
The
LIP?
licensed independent practitioner.
Thank you. Have you ever worked in any other departments other than pharmacy at Mount Carmel West?
Your Honor, beyond the scope at this point?
Agreed, sustained.
That was raised in,
Sustained.
okay, I'm sorry. During your cross-examination, Ms. Menashe asked you about comments or testimony that you offered in a deposition, which is in a case entitled Marilyn Brigner as executor of the estate of Larry Brigner versus Mount Carmel West Health Systems. Do you remember that deposition?
Yes.
And at that time, she asked you about rating your concern about the conversation with Randy Miles, correct?
Correct.
And you indicated that, or she indicated that you testified that your concern was medium.
Correct.
Is it not a fact that you testified after that you didn't have enough information to further grade the situation?
That's true.
Okay. You've given an HR interview, a pharmacy board interview, and a deposition in a civil case in this case, correct?
Correct.
So you have testified outside of this courtroom in other causes,
Yes.
other than just for the state of Ohio. And may I have that separation document? Can you mark this?
If it's already marked, use the mark.
It's not marked. Do you want to mark it as your exhibit?
Yeah, I didn't show it to him, so I don't need to mark it. I'm sorry, stand up. I dress.
Okay, well, I'm actually going to show it to him. So just giving you the opportunity if you wanted to. What number? 31. I'm going to hand this witness, Mr. O'Connell, the document that we have now labeled as State's Exhibit 31.
Okay.
Sean, who's the person named on this document?
Swanner.
Is your name on this document?
No.
Is this your document?
No.
No further questions?
Your Honor, may I
Okay,
cross
and-
on it?
Well, hold on.
Right.
Any questions on the Mosh email?
Yes, please.
If one, just one. Just want to make sure, showing you State's Exhibit 20D. Mr. O'Connell, could you look at the names where it says "to"? And let me know after you've had an opportunity to review all the names.
Okay.
Do you see your name as someone that email is addressed to?
No.
Do you have any independent recollection as to this email appearing in your inbox, in your email?
No.
Your Honor, may I question about this? No. Thank you.
No. You may step down. Thank you. Let's call your next witness. to wear those things anymore unless you want to. There's a big meeting occurring noon hour. Maybe. You're not on the floor, counselor.
I'd like to clarify something with counsel for prosecution.
Okay, time out. Okay. Mr. Reinhardt is asking to clear something up on the record. He's technically not on the floor. He's not under subpoena. He is here on behalf of his client, though. Do you guys even want to put anything on the record? Or you want to leave him hanging?
I do not, Your Honor. I prefer that it not necessarily be in our
Sorry,
record.
you're stuck. well, I understand, they have to hear you.
Sure.
So it's a give and take, you gotta put some volume out.
Okay, I'll do my best. Let me know if I'm not.
You guys hear her okay?
I hear first name.
Thank you.
May I proceed, Ms. Bueller?
Thank you, Your Honor.
She didn't hear her first.
Oh, can you say your first name one more time for me, Dr. Moody?
Sure. Gina, Gina.
Good morning, Dr. Moody. So first of all, where are you currently employed?
With Mount Carmel Medical Group.
And where, which facility?
I work at Mount Carmel Grove City and Mount Carmel St. Anne's
And in what capacity?
as a pulmonary and critical care physician.
Okay. Do you work specific hours?
I work during the day. We work in different capacities. We see all of the patients in the ICU, as well as patients admitted to the other parts of the hospital with lung disease, and have an outpatient practice at both of those locations where we see pulmonary patients on the outpatient side.
Okay. And why don't you tell me a little bit about your education, how you got where you are?
Sure. Went undergrad at Notre Dame 4 years, and then medical school at Lake Erie College of Osteopathic Medicine. I did my residency at Riverside Methodist Hospital here in Columbus in internal medicine for 3 years, and then pulmonary and critical care fellowship, which I completed at St. Louis University in 2013.
And could you explain for the members of the jury what a pulmonologist is, what they do?
Sure. And as I said, it's pulmonary and critical care is my background. So we do a 3-year fellowship, training in both of those specialties. Pulmonary is treating diseases of the lungs. So really any disease that afflicts the lungs, we will see patients. The most common things being asthma and COPD. And the critical care portion is the management of patients when they're in the intensive care unit.
So those two combined together in your practice?
Correct. It's a joint specialty.
Okay. And are you licensed and boarded in both of those?
That's right, yes.
How long have you been?
I would have taken, internal medicine boards I would have taken in 2009, pulmonary in 2012, and critical care in 2014.
Okay. And do you have any continuing education requirements to maintain your licensure?
You do. There's, to maintain your state license, you have to maintain, I don't know the specific number of hours that are required, but that's dictated to us.
And have you maintained all of your credentials since 2009, 2012, and 2014?
I have.
And how did you come to work for Mount Carmel?
Upon completing my fellowship, I was looking for jobs and interviewed and had a desire to be back in Columbus, having done my residency here. And so I interviewed with the group. At the time, it was a private practice group, not employed by Mount Carmel, called Central Ohio Pulmonary Disease. And interviewed with them and liked the practice quite a lot and the other physicians. And so I joined them in August of 2013.
And now specifically within the ICU, what is your role?
I function as an attending physician, so we see all of the patients for whom there's critical care needs, and basically manage their day-to-day care throughout their ICU stay.
Could you be more specific when you say manage their day-to-day care?
We're ultimately managing those patients. So for instance, in a patient who is on a ventilator, we're managing the ventilator, making changes to that, trying to determine if they're ready to start weaning from the ventilator, managing any underlying diseases associated with their lungs. Patients in the ICU are often on vasopressors, which are medications to help their blood pressure, so we're frequently adjusting those. Other common things, frequently patients have infections and are septic or in septic shock in the ICU, so antibiotics, managing those. We often are doing this in consultation with other physicians. For instance, if a patient has kidney failure, our nephrologists are involved and different things like that. But we're ultimately kind of coordinating the care of that patient in the ICU.
At any point, do you interact with family members?
Sure, on an almost daily basis.
Okay, what are those interactions like, or what's the purpose of those interactions?
First, just to keep the family informed that this person is critically ill. In general, that's a very tense, upsetting situation for any family, and very frightening. And then also, it's really important because often these patients are incapacitated, meaning they're on a ventilator or they're deeply sedated, so they cannot make decisions or advocate for themselves. So their family is who we turn to first to convey information, and then for them to tell us about the patient and provide background, and ultimately, in some cases, to have to make decisions as things progress.
How much of your time do you think you spend speaking with family members in the ICU?
Counselor, you're going to have to get your voice up.
Sorry. How much time do you spend speaking with families in the ICU?
You know, it varies day to day. If a patient is stable or getting better, it may be a brief 5 minutes. You know, they're doing pretty good today, that's it. Other times, if we have a lot more to get into or there have been changes in the patient's condition, it may be a 20 or 25-minute conversation.
And so do you create these plans with the family members involved?
We update them. I mean, ultimately, the plans, it's ultimately, as the attending physician, my decision, and we have rounds every day with our ICU team. But we inform the family of all those plans, and as decisions need to be made, not just end-of-life decisions, if there's a surgery or a need for a procedure that requires consent, we're in touch with the family. So they're certainly a part of everything we're doing, but we ultimately are going to care for that patient. And there are cases where, unfortunately, there may not be family or, family present. We're still always going to act on the best interest of the patient.
And what happens at the end of your shift?
And again, we don't really work shift work. We have an outpatient practice. We're seeing patients throughout the hospital on given days. But at the conclusion of an ICU day at Mount Carmel, Grove City, because we have residents, they sign out to the nighttime physician who is coming on at 7 p.m.
And between 2015 and 2019, were you working at Mount Carmel West in the same capacity?
Yes.
Was it the same procedure at that time?
Yes.
So you would transfer the care of the patient to the evening doctor?
Correct.
Okay. What are the expectations then at that point?
And again, this was resident-driven because we're a teaching hospital, but the expectation was essentially I don't want to say real, but it's certainly a pretty in-depth sign-off. They would go room to room, the senior resident and the nighttime physician, and provide a sign-out on this is what's going on with this patient, if there were pending tests that they needed to follow up on, that type of thing. And then similarly at 7 a.m., they would have sign-out rounds in a similar manner.
Okay. Have you ever worked in the ICU in the evening?
Yes, I would pick up some shifts there.
I'm sorry, one more time?
I would pick up some shifts covering the ICU at night.
Okay.
And sometimes I was just there late by the nature of the day.
How do things differ in the ICU in the daytime and in the evening?
I mean, in a number of ways. I guess first is you have a smaller team. During the day, you have multiple attendings in the hospital as well as residents and nurse practitioners. We have critical care nurse practitioners involved. At night, I think until about 2017, we had a nighttime ICU physician and a senior resident. And then somewhere around 2016 or 17, they pulled that resident. So he or she wasn't there anymore. So you certainly had less support from a provider standpoint. But the nights are different in that you aren't having to write a progress note on every patient or talk to every family. You're there to admit new patients to the ICU and stabilize anybody that becomes unstable or has a change in their condition.
So you said you're not writing as many progress notes, you said?
Correct. During the day, every patient I see, make it 16 ICU patients, I have to write a progress note on, or if they're a new patient, a new consultation. At night, the only notes, not only, but the notes that the nighttime physician does are just on the patients that are coming in, or they would leave a brief note if there's a change in a patient's condition.
So generally, do you not expect there to be much in the medical record from the evening into the next day?
Again, it depends. If the patient is stable overnight, no, there really wouldn't be need to have anything from that physician. And if there's a change in the condition, typically a brief note to document what changed and what that physician did about it is indicated.
Okay. And in your practice, do you perform palliative care of any kind?
We do. Palliative ventilator withdrawals and even transitioning patients to palliative care measures is fairly frequent occurrence.
Can you talk to me a little bit about the transferring to palliative care, what that entails?
Sure, and it usually happens in stepwise fashion over typically several days. Somebody has been in the ICU, critically ill, without showing signs of recovery, and perhaps progressing. In some cases, it may be briefer if their condition is declining very rapidly. And it most often involves meeting with the patient's family to talk about what the wishes would be of their loved one if they could sit up and tell us that. And we'll often say that to families, if you can tell me what your loved one would want here. And based on those wishes and the patient's condition, we talk about making decisions, such as not resuscitating the patient should their heart stop. That's something we call a DNR-CCA, meaning we continue life support, but if the patient's heart stops, we would not resuscitate them, and we would allow them to pass away naturally. If the patient is continuing to decline or the prognosis is felt to be terminal, then we have those discussions and talk about transitioning the patient to what we call DNRCC, which is a do not resuscitate comfort care, where we would withdraw the life support measures and subsequently allow the patient to pass away without, any interventions.
And when do you generally have these conversations with family members?
At any time, frankly, because a patient's condition can change. It's a very fluid situation in the ICU. I would say most common is typically in the morning, we round on patients, recognize what's going on. It's typically in the afternoon that I'm meeting with families and having those discussions and making those decisions as needed.
And do you perform palliative extubations as part of this process?
Yes, we do. I do.
And back in 2015, 2019, were all these processes the same that you're speaking? Would you go through these same processes as well?
Yes, yeah.
Okay. Has your practice changed at all since that time when it comes to palliative care or palliative extubation?
I don't think in any significant way, no.
Okay. So can you talk to me in detail more about what you say to these families, what you discuss with them when you're discussing palliative extubations?
Sure. First, we'll review the clinical case, so what has gone on, and what's the current status of the patient. This often entails going almost, we'll say, organ system by organ system, meaning the patient has had a brain injury or perhaps, damage to their heart or kidneys, and sort of review the current situation of where we are. And often the fact that a lot of these things may not be reversible. We always want to fix the fixable problems, and if we're in a situation where we don't have fixable problems, then it's more dire, and we'll simply go through that with the family in detail and answer their questions, because it can be a bit overwhelming at times. And then, again, talk about what their family member, their loved one would want under these circumstances.
Do you prepare the family members for the actual procedure?
I do. Typically, we sort of introduce that as we start to meet with them, and then closer to the time, if we are going to be performing that withdrawal, we go into greater detail about what that will entail.
Is the extubation process a planned procedure?
Oh, yes.
And can you tell me maybe some specific things that you tell the family members? Do you prepare them?
Sure. We'll tell them, and we always give the family a choice if they want to be in the room or not, because the whole situation is very sad and it can be upsetting. And I'll typically tell them, and it's very individualized, frankly, but based on how the patient has been responding or not, we'll talk about medications that we may give prior to removal of the endotracheal tube. And I'll let them know that when the tube comes out, patients often cough and there will be some phlegm, and that while it may be distressing to them to see that, that is not inherently painful to the patient. But some families choose to step out during that part of the process. And then I make them aware of the fact that based on how that patient responds in the seconds, minutes, hours that follow, medications will be available to ensure that that patient is comfortable and peaceful.
Do you tell them what medications are available?
I don't know that I specifically do. If they ask, I certainly would.
Okay. And what medications do you use to keep them comfortable?
In my practice, most commonly are morphine and Ativan.
So you commonly use morphine and Ativan combined?
Or sort of alternating, and again, it depends on the patient's needs and the symptoms they exhibit, but those orders are in on an as-needed basis, yes.
Can you take me kind of step by step how you would actually do this process?
Sure, so typically, well, the first step is looking at what medications they are on, that they've been on sedative-wise. For instance, if a patient is on what we call a paralytic medication, we can't really do anything until that paralytic has been turned off. That is keeping them from moving at all. So we turn that off and we monitor something called a train of 4 to make sure that that paralytic is no longer in their system. Once we are...
Doc, help me out. You're going a little fast there.
I apologize.
Okay? And
Yeah.
your poor hands are falling off as they're writing down.
I will
so-
slow down. Yeah, talking shop, so it comes natural. But I will, at that point, look at the other medications that they are on for sedation. Some patients are not on any continuous sedatives at this point, and some are on high doses. So we will always either turn those off or reduce the dose to the lowest effective dose to maintain comfort during this process. And then based on the patient's level of responsiveness, something called a CPOT, which sort of assesses any distress the patient might be experiencing. We also use a RASS, R-A-S-S goal, and so we assess their level of sedation. And most often, prior to taking the tube out, we'll administer a dose of morphine and sometimes Ativan at the same time or within close proximity. And then after the tube comes out, most often those medications are available every 15 minutes. So if they exhibit any distress, if those scores that I mentioned trigger the nurse's attention or my attention, then they will receive subsequent doses of the morphine or Ativan.
And how do you use the CPOT and the RAS to determine?
So that's a little bit more of a nursing-driven, they're the ones bedside throughout this process and assessing that, but that may trigger the recognition that this patient was not grimacing and appeared comfortable, and 10 or 15 minutes later we're seeing that they are more tense, and then that would prompt the nurse to administer another dose of the morphine, and those orders are already in place.
In the dose that you give prior to extubation, do you ask the nurse or look at the chart to see what the CPOT and RAS score have been?
Yes, and typically I'm bedside to assess the patient too, to see how they're doing in real time, and also looking at what doses of medications they have received up to that point to help guide me in making that dosage decision.
And when you say you administer or you dose them, you're not the one giving them the medication?
No, I shouldn't say that. Yeah, the nurse is the one actually administering the medicine. I am putting the order in and usually talking to that nurse about the plan.
And when you say you put the order in, what do you do specifically to do that?
There's a palliative care, I think it's called a terminal vent withdrawal order set, which is fairly comprehensive, and there's other parts to it, but it includes the dosing for the morphine and Ativan. So I just simply scroll down to the dosages that I want for those medications.
And that's your current practice?
It is.
Was that your practice back between 2015 to 2019?
For the most part, I think the order set has become mandatory since 2019, I believe. But there was an order set. It's probably changed some in the interim since 2015. But I think I used the order set in some cases, but probably not all cases. Sometimes I would directly enter the morphine and Ativan. So the dosages would have been the same, but it may not have been part of an order set.
And then do you know what happens after you place the order, either via the order set or just your own individual dose? Do you know what happens then?
To some extent, it doesn't directly involve me, but a pharmacist typically verifies those orders, and they are then available for a nurse to draw up and administer.
Have you ever interacted with any of the pharmacists?
Oh, sure.
Have they ever called you after you've submitted a dose?
For palliative or?
For anything?
For anything, sure, yeah.
Have they ever questioned the amount of medication or the type?
Yes, in different cases, for instance, and I'm not talking about palliative medications, but if I put in a medication that perhaps would react with another medicine the patient is already on, they'll alert me to that, and in some cases I might say, yes, we should stop that medicine, and I appreciate them. In other cases, there might be a reason that I feel the benefits outweigh the risks, and we need to give it. But there's definite collaboration there.
Okay. So you may adjust, you may explain.
Right, but there'll be a discussion and some collaboration with them.
Okay. And you said that you make sure that there is medication every 15 minutes?
Yes.
And how is that made available to the patient?
Again, the orders are there, so then the nurse is able to readily draw up those medications as the patient needs them.
And when you say the order is there, could you be a little bit more specific?
It's in the computer. It's been approved by a pharmacist. So, and I don't know exactly, frankly, what the nurse does, but she is able to access those medications then with ease and very quickly based on the patient's needs.
Okay, let's take a lunch break at this point in time. Ladies and gentlemen, can I take 15 minutes out of your lunch and come back at 1:15? Okay? I know you all have a microwave back here. Okay? Ladies and gentlemen, remember the admonition. We'll get started at 1:15.
All right.
Just relax. You can't go anywhere yet. Have a good lunch, guys.
Across the street and reimburse her, just so she thinks that she should not.
Doctor, while we're on recess, okay, you can't talk about how you testify.
Okay.
So if anybody approaches you about this or that, you can answer